All right, let's jump right into it. When we talk about educational gaps, we usually point the finger at household poverty, right? Or maybe a handful of underfunded schools. But in this explainer, we're unpacking some truly eye-opening research by Marian J. Tolomadow. And what this research shows is that something much bigger is at play. Literally, your physical location on a map is quietly but powerfully shaping your future. So it all boils down to this fundamental question. Does where you live actually determine what you learn? It's a heavy thought, isn't it? I mean, we all want to believe a child's potential is limitless, no matter their coordinates. But we really need to look at whether a student's zip code is basically acting as a crystal ball for their academic destiny. Is geography just some background detail, or is it actually the main character in this story? To get to the bottom of this, we first have to tackle a really persistent idea. Let's call it the universal policy myth. See, in governance, there's this huge assumption that if you design uniform national education policies, you automatically get equal opportunities for everyone. You know the logic. If the rulebook is exactly the same, the funding formula is identical, the curriculum matches up perfectly, then boom, fairness is guaranteed. Well, not quite. The research completely shatters this illusion, showing that applying universal, one-size-fits-all rules to wildly different local realities is exactly where the system starts to break down.
And you can really see the disconnect here between theory and reality. So, on paper, sure, you've got these uniform policies applied with mathematical perfection, but in practice, it's a completely different universe. A student in the bustling national capital region versus a student in a remote, conflict-affected province, they are facing entirely different realities. We're talking completely different infrastructure, vastly different local security conditions, and sometimes just the sheer physical distance to even get to a school building. So taking an identical policy design and slapping it onto these totally different realities, obviously you're going to get completely different results.
Now, this isn't just abstract academic theory. We have the hard evidence to back it up. Looking at the data from the Philippine Statistics Authority, we can actually map out the geography of inequality. And honestly, the story it tells is pretty stark. It shows a structurally unequal system where location systematically dictates whether a kid even gets access to baseline opportunities. Just look at this massive gap in primary completion rates. Over in Region I, an impressive 91.5% of students actually finish primary education. That's fantastic. But then you look at the Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao, or ARMM, and that number just nosedives to 37.1%. Guys, this isn't some minor statistical blip. This is a massive, glaring structural flaw. The majority of young learners in ARMM aren't even finishing primary school. So regional inequality isn't just a glitch in the matrix, it's a fundamental feature of how these uniform policies are actually playing out on the ground. So what happens to the kids who don't finish? Well, that brings us to this number right here, 17.17%. That is the primary dropout rate in ARMM. Let that sink in for a second. That is almost 1 in 5 children stepping away from their foundational education. You really have to think about the long-term ripple effects of that. What does that do to a region's economic future, their workforce readiness, the whole community's development? And the severity of this becomes undeniable when you put the regions side by side. Region I, their dropout rate is a tiny 1.13%. Meanwhile, ARMM is sitting at that massive 17.17%. The system is just visibly failing to keep students in school in specific geographic pockets. Literally, a child's odds of dropping out before they even learn basic reading and math is heavily tied to the specific province they just happen to be born in. And sadly, this alarming trend doesn't just magically fix itself. It continues straight into high school. Region 4A totally outpaces ARMM here, hitting an 81.6% secondary completion rate, while ARMM lags behind at 64%. The gap doesn't fade as students get older. It actually compounds. Because think about it, if a region is already struggling just to get students through primary school, all those structural hurdles are going to remain firmly in place for high school too. You also feel this severe resource gap the second you step inside a classroom. In the National Capital Region, a primary school teacher handles a pretty manageable 23.6 students on average. But in ARMM, that jumps to nearly 40 kids per teacher. Seriously, just imagine trying to deliver quality instruction or give any sort of one-on-one attention in a room that's almost twice as packed, and usually with way fewer resources to boot. The quality of learning absolutely takes a hit because of this crazy spatial imbalance and how teachers are deployed.
Now, as Tally Madow's research brilliantly points out, geography isn't acting in a vacuum. Yes, it's a powerful force, but it overlaps with another huge issue: household poverty. And when you mix geographic isolation with extreme economic hardship, you get what researchers call a compound disadvantage. It's a double whammy. The rugged landscape makes it physically hard to get to school, and the poverty makes it financially impossible to afford the journey.
You can actually see this spatial overlap perfectly right here. Up in the capital region, the poverty incidence is incredibly low, just 1.1%. In Calabarzon, it's about 5.3%. But watch what happens as you move geographically further away from the center. Mimaropa jumps to 16.3%. Northern Mindanao is at 18.4%, and then down in the Zamboanga Peninsula, almost a quarter of the population, 24.2%, is living in poverty. So, surprise, surprise, the highest poverty levels overlap almost perfectly with the regions that have the weakest education indicators. Here's the harsh reality. Public education might be free on paper, but actually accessing it, not free at all. Imagine being a family trying to carry the weight of these compounding burdens. When high regional poverty crashes into under-resourced schools, equal access essentially becomes impossible. Because we aren't just talking about, buying notebooks. We're talking about the daily transit costs to reach a school that's miles away. We're talking about nutritional deficits that make it literally impossible for a kid to focus. And of course, the massive opportunity cost. The fact that a child sitting in a classroom isn't out earning vital income for their struggling family. Their research really hits the nail on the head with this quote. Economic vulnerability and geographic disadvantage reinforce one another in shaping educational outcomes. I love how that's phrased, because it makes it so clear. Geography isn't just some passive, static background. It is an active, central driver of inequality. The physical terrain and the economic terrain are basically teaming up to keep marginalized students locked out of the classroom. And honestly, the larger data pool backs this up 100%. Findings from the Philippine Institute for Development Studies show that learner mobility and outcomes are noticeably better in places like the NCR in the Cordillera Administrative Region. Meanwhile, severe, ongoing educational challenges are plaguing places like BARMM. The data just consistently shows much stronger human capital development in Luzon compared to huge swaths of the Visayas and Mindanao. Geography is the one unifying thread tying all these disparities together. So, looking at all this extensive evidence, we're led to one undeniable conclusion. We desperately need a massive paradigm shift in how we govern education. We have got to change how we distribute support. Why? Because our current system distributes opportunities way too evenly in its policy design, but entirely too unevenly in practical reality. Think about it. Handing the exact same resources to a wealthy, booming urban center and a struggling remote province might look perfectly fair on an accountant's ledger, but on the ground, it is deeply, deeply inequitable. To actually fix this mess, policymakers have to ditch the one-size-fits-all national averages and start using tailored, highly localized approaches. The research points out 3 major policy shifts we need. Number 1, decentralized implementation, so local authorities actually have the flexibility to tackle their own unique geographic hurdles. Number 2, bake poverty-responsive strategies directly into education planning. And number 3, align resource distribution with regional risk profiles. Basically, if a region has skyrocketing dropout rates and exhausted, overloaded teachers, they absolutely need a bigger slice of the pie. Period. This means we have to completely redefine what fairness looks like. True equity actually means providing unequal support to address unequal conditions. It's about acknowledging that students are starting from wildly diverse places. Look at it this way. Giving everyone a pair of size 9 shoes is technically equal, right? But it's totally useless if half the class wears a size 6 and the other half needs a size 11. True equity demands giving heavier, highly targeted support to the specific regions that are battling the hardest against both brutal geography and crushing poverty. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a final thought to chew on. Going forward, will our education reforms merely expand access on paper, staying superficially fair, or will we finally step up and adapt our policies to close these deep-seated regional gaps in reality? Are we going to ensure that a student's zip code is just an address, rather than a lifelong academic sentence? Thanks so much for exploring this vital research with me today, and definitely keep questioning how we can build systems that truly, genuinely serve every learner everywhere.